is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. How about you?
Hello everyone, I am Casey the Gamer, and it's time for another game review. It's finally time to go on one of the most iconic adventures through Dracula's castle. It's time for the amazing Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was developed by Konami and was released on March 20th, 1997 in Japan and on October 3rd, 1997 in North America for the PlayStation. It would also see a release on the Sega Saturn in Japan the following year. It's been released on other consoles over the years as well, like the Xbox 360, the PS3, the PSP, and the PS4. I know the Saturn version does have some exclusive areas compared to the PlayStation version, but for this review, I will be looking at the original PlayStation release. Now, I didn't play this game when it first came out. I have vague memories of watching my brother play it on the PlayStation back in the day. I don't know if he rented it or borrowed it from a friend or whatever. My first experience playing the game wasn't until I was in high school. I bought it on the Xbox 360 arcade, and I had a blast with it. I fell in love with this game. Symphony of the Night ditches the classic Castlevania formula and brings us back into the world of Metroidvanias. Castlevania 2 was the last time the series tried anything Metroidvania-like, but it was far different than the Metroidvanias we know today. Symphony of the Night, on the other hand, is one of the most iconic Metroidvania games out there, and it sets the standard for a lot of future Metroidvanias, both in general and within the Castlevania franchise. So when I first started doing these reviews, I covered Super Castlevania 4 because that's my favorite classic Castlevania. Before I decided to cover the whole series, this was going to be the next one that I covered because it's my favorite Metroidvania Castlevania game. There's some older spin-offs that I haven't looked at yet, but I will eventually. But for now, I'm happy that it's finally time to talk about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Let's get into it. There are spoilers ahead for the story of the game. Symphony of the Night is a direct sequel to Rondo of Blood. The game opens up with Richter's battle against Dracula from the end of Rondo of Blood. After a crazy fight, Richter defeats Dracula. A few years later, Richter suddenly disappears. Maria takes off to search for him, but she has no idea where to look. Dracula's castle appears out of nowhere, and Maria takes that as a sign and decides to investigate there. Meanwhile, Dracula's son Alucard senses dark forces at work and jumps into action, entering Dracula's castle as well. Alucard decimates any enemy foolish enough to get in his way until he runs into Dracula's right-hand man, Death. Death demands that Alucard stop his attack. Alucard refuses, and Death steals all of Alucard's equipment before disappearing. Alucard delves further into the castle, arming himself with whatever weapons he can find and battling all manner of enemy. Alucard battles a tag team of Slagra and Gaibon and easily defeats them both. Alucard explores further and eventually meets Maria. They exchange a few words before going their separate ways. Alucard battles a doppelganger of himself and manages to defeat it. Alucard runs into Maria again, and she says that the castle is different than she remembers. Alucard explains that the castle takes on many incarnations. Maria realizes that she can't trust her memories. Alucard continues his journey and defeats a hippogriff before meeting Maria again. Maria asks if Alucard knows Richter Belmont. Alucard knows of the Belmonts, as he worked with Trevor Belmont many centuries ago. Maria explains that Richter disappeared, and she is sure that he is in the castle. She asks Alucard to let her know if he sees Richter. Alucard agrees to do it. Alucard continues making his way further into the castle, gathering more weapons and items while battling more bosses like a lesser demon, Karasamon, and Scylla. Alucard enters the Colosseum and runs into Richter, who claims to be the lord of the castle. Richter summons a werewolf and a minotaur to attack Alucard. Richter disappears as Alucard engages in battle with the two creatures. Alucard defeats them and keeps exploring. Alucard enters a nightmare, causing him to revisit his mother's death scene. As she is about to be killed, she tells Alucard to remember her final words, which are to hate humans, but Alucard knows that's wrong, and he breaks through the spell. It was a succubus trying to trick Alucard. Alucard destroys the succubus and grabs a ring that she drops. Alucard continues exploring and battles a Cerberus, a giant mass of bodies called Grand Falloon, and Alrox and his two crazy forms. Alucard meets Maria again, and she asks if he found Richter. Alucard explains that he's not sure if who he found is the one that Maria is looking for, as he claimed to be the lord of the castle. Maria claims that Alucard is wrong and takes off. Alucard finds another ring and heads to a room with a giant clock. Alucard equips the ring that he got from the succubus and the one that he just found, and it causes the floor to open up. Alucard finds Maria yet again. How does she keep getting to all of these places? Seriously. Anyway, she admits that Alucard was right about Richter. Maria thinks that someone must be controlling him. Maria says that they can't harm Richter, but Alucard says that he must be stopped. Maria agrees and gives Alucard the holy glasses, which will let him see beyond evil illusions. Alucard takes his leave and heads to Dracula's throne room and finds Richter there waiting for him. Richter attacks Alucard, but because of the holy glasses, Alucard can see a green orb floating around Richter. Alucard destroys the orb, and it turns out that the priest Shaft was controlling Richter. Shaft says that he may have been defeated, but the revival of Dracula is at hand. Shaft disappears and a portal opens up, revealing an upside-down castle. Richter is upset with all of the things that he's done, and Maria shows up, thanking Alucard for not killing Richter. Richter is surprised to hear the name Alucard, wondering if it's the same Alucard that fought with his ancestor. Alucard declares that there's no time for small talk and asks if the person who controlled Richter is in the upside-down castle. Richter says that he believes so, and Alucard tells Maria and Richter to get out of there while he finishes things once and for all. Alucard enters the upside-down castle and begins exploring and dealing with even more powerful enemies. There's tons of crazy bosses awaiting him as well, such as the giant bat, Frankenstein's monster, Death, another doppelganger, Galamoth, Medusa, the Mummy, fake versions of the heroes from Castlevania 3, and Beelzebub. Alucard also obtains pieces of Dracula from some of the bosses. Alucard enters the upside-down room with the giant clock, with all of Dracula's parts and both rings from earlier equipped. The door opens and Alucard encounters Shaft. Alucard destroys Shaft once and for all before Dracula himself appears. Alucard and his father share some words. Dracula says that Alucard needs to put aside his weak human side and join him in remaking the world. Alucard says that in the name of his mother, he will defeat Dracula again. Alucard begins a battle with his father. And after a very easy fight, Alucard is victorious against Dracula. As he's dying, again, Dracula can't believe that he lost. Alucard says Dracula has been doomed ever since he lost his ability to love. Dracula asks about Lisa, Dracula's wife and Alucard's mother. He wants to know what her last words were. Alucard says that Lisa said, "Do not hate humans. If you cannot live with them, at least do them no harm, for theirs is already a hard lot." She also wanted Dracula to know that she would love him for all of eternity. Dracula begs for forgiveness from Lisa and says goodbye to Alucard. Dracula dies and his castle crumbles. Alucard meets back up with Richter and Maria outside. Maria is happy to see Alucard is all right, and Richter apologizes, saying that it's his fault that Alucard had to fight his father. Alucard says it's okay. He had his own reasons for fighting his father. Richter says that it must have been hard, and Alucard confirms, but says to remember that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Maria asks what Alucard will do now. Alucard explains that the blood that flows through him is cursed, and it would be best for the world if he were to disappear forever. Alucard says his goodbyes and says that they won't meet again, and takes off. Richter asks if Maria wants to go after Alucard, but she says no, but hopes to see him again one day. Richter and Maria decide to head home. So the ending that I got is like the neutral ending. There are two other endings. There's the bad ending, where you kill Richter when you fight him. By doing that, you never get to explore the inverted castle. The other ending is the good ending, by getting the map fully completed, both the regular castle and the inverted castle. In this ending, Maria does go after Alucard. I really enjoy the story for this game overall. It's a lot of fun and has some fantastically cheesy voice acting, at least in the English version, and that makes it extra fun for me. But it was also nice to see a bit more to the story than in the previous games. The gameplay in Symphony of the Night is fantastic. Instead of the traditional Castlevania formula, we have entered the Metroidvania era. Instead of having multiple stages, we are given Dracula's castle to explore, which is broken up into multiple areas. In Symphony of the Night, you play as Dracula's son, Alucard, being promoted from a side character in Castlevania 3 to the main character in this game. Alucard uses a variety of swords, two-handed swords, knives, clubs, and various fist weapons instead of the classic vampire killer whip. Alucard can also make use of various shields as well as some single-use items in order to help him deal with the various enemies in the game. As for the movement, instead of the Belmont strut, we have the Alucard Power Walk. Alucard can also jump and do a backdash, as well as obtaining other various movement options, which I will discuss a little bit later. In addition to being a Metroidvania, Symphony of the Night does also feature some light RPG elements. Once you obtain enough experience points, Alucard will level up. Leveling up will give a slight boost to his health, magic, hearts, and his other various stats. Besides just leveling up, Alucard can increase his health and his hearts by finding health and heart upgrades throughout the castle. Alucard also has several equipment slots. He has slots for each of his hands, so you can do a one-handed weapon and a shield, two one-handed weapons, or a single two-handed weapon. Or, could you do two shields? I don't know why you would. I really don't, but the thought just popped into my head. Anyway, there's also a slot for a headpiece, armor, a cloak, and 2 spots for accessories. Most of the things you equip will impact your stats as well. There are several ways to obtain equipment. Some items or weapons are dropped by enemies, just found sitting around the castle, or they can be bought from the librarian. It's a really good feeling when an enemy drops a super awesome weapon or piece of equipment. Besides the equipment, there are several consumables. There are multiple healing items, as well as items that remove the status effects Alucard might be affected by. Alucard also has multiple magic spells at his disposal. The classic triple fireball from Dracula in pretty much every game, and also from Alucard himself in Castlevania 3, is one of them. There's also a Soul Steal move which will drain health from enemies and heal you, and there's several other spells. They can be quite hard to pull off due to the crazy button combinations required to use them. There are also several relics that can be found throughout the game. Relics have several different uses. They can improve Alucard's movement abilities by giving him a double jump and a super jump. They can also unlock different transformations for Alucard, such as the wolf form, the mist form, and the bat form. There are also relics that upgrade the transformations, giving them extra abilities. Between the movement upgrades and the transformations, they allow Alucard to reach new areas of the castle he couldn't previously reach. Other relics also allow Alucard to move through water without taking damage or give him stat boosts. Also in the relic section, there are the familiar cards. You can only have one of these active at a time. There are 5 familiars in total: the demon, the fairy, the ghost, the bat, and the sword familiar. They all have their uses. The fairy can use items to heal you or revive you. The demon can attack enemies and push buttons to unlock secret areas, and the sword familiar can attack enemies as well. Just as a few examples, the one I use the most often is the sword familiar. Familiars also level up, and once the sword familiar reaches a certain level, it transforms into a powerful weapon that you can use yourself, which is really cool. And along with all of that, sub-weapons return, and as usual, they use hearts as ammo. The game includes all of the classic sub-weapons: the knife, the axe, the holy water, the stopwatch, and the cross. I wish I could say that they were all like they were before, but they have changed the cross. Instead of it being a throwable weapon that comes back, it summons a giant cross that damages enemies. It's like it's always doing the item crash from Rondo of Blood. So I'm a little disappointed by that. The Holy Book also makes a return from Rondo of Blood. The game also includes a couple of new sub-weapons as well. There is the Rebound Stone, which is thrown out and bounces off any surface it hits, likely hitting enemies multiple times. There's a weapon that damages enemies with Holy Lightning, and one that uses Sacred Ash that you throw on the ground. The Lightning one is pretty cool, but I'm not the biggest fan of the other new ones too much. As I mentioned earlier, you are presented with a big castle to explore that is broken up into multiple areas, and they are all crawling with several classic Castlevania enemies, as well as some new ones. In addition to the enemies, there are several classic bosses and new ones. Bosses include Slagra and Gaibon, a doppelganger, a hippogriff, the Lesser Demon, Karasamon, Scylla, a werewolf and a minotaur, the Succubus, Cerberus, Granfaloon, and Alrox. Once those bosses are dealt with, you have to deal with the mind-controlled Richter Belmont. If you explore thoroughly, you get the Holy Glasses from Maria, which will show a green orb next to Richter. Attack the orb instead of Richter, and once you destroy it, the boss fight ends. If you don't, and you end up killing Richter, the game ends there, giving you the bad ending. If you do get the glasses and destroy the orb, it's revealed that Shaft has been controlling Richter. Shaft retreats into the inverted castle, and you take off after him. The inverted castle is the same, more or less, as the original, except everything is upside down and features new, more powerful enemies and bosses. The bosses in the inverted castle include the giant bat, Frankenstein's monster, Death, another doppelganger, Galamoth, Medusa, the Mummy, fake versions of the heroes from Castlevania 3, and Beelzebub. 5 of these bosses will drop parts of Dracula, which you have to obtain in order to enter the final area. In the final area, you have to battle Shaft and then Dracula. Once they're dealt with, you have beaten the game. The game is very fun, and it's very satisfying when you find new weapons, relics, and abilities to reach new areas. It's just a really nice gameplay loop. Overall, I'd say the game is on the easier side, but it doesn't take away from how fun it is. Like, it can be kind of difficult at the start, but once you start leveling up and getting more stuff, it becomes pretty easy. The inverted castle can especially be a cakewalk if you're lucky enough to get the Chrysagrim to drop. The weapon basically turns Alucard into a walking blender of death. It hits enemies multiple times and destroys them in no time. The first few times I played the game, I never got it. I never even knew about it. One of the last times I played it, I decided to try and get it, and it took a long time. Recording footage for this review, the very first enemy that dropped it when I killed it. I couldn't believe it. I was so hyped. If you get 2 of them, you can equip 2, which makes you even more insanely overpowered. I think one thing that definitely lowers the difficulty by a good margin is that the bottomless pits are gone, so there are no deaths from dropping into pits. On the flip side, they made the clock tower extra annoying, Like, it's usually annoying, but both the regular and inverted clock tower are awful. Castlevania Symphony of the Night also includes some extra characters you can play as. Once you beat the game, start a new game and name yourself Richter, and you'll be able to play as Richter throughout the game. It kinda turns it into more of a classic-style Castlevania experience. Richter doesn't level up or get any other weapons like Alucard does. Richter uses the Vampire Killer and the various sub-weapons. There's also the ability to play as an Axe Armor. If you name yourself Axe Armor, it gives you an equipable item that turns you into an Axe Armor. It's pretty ridiculous, but I love it. You could also play as Maria in the Sega Saturn version and the PSP version that was included with the Rondo of Blood remake, Dracula X Chronicles. But even without playable Maria in the regular PlayStation version, and even if you don't mess around with Richter mode or anything like that, the main game is an absolute blast. Symphony of the Night features some incredibly beautiful pixel art. The characters, bosses, backgrounds, and everything all looks fantastic. The game does make some use of 3D graphics, like some enemies and a couple of the cutscenes showing off the castle. The sound effects are also pretty great. Top-notch Castlevania sound effects, and as usual, they fit the game perfectly. The soundtrack is absolutely mind-blowing. So many beautifully composed tracks that really help build the atmosphere and just fit each area of the game wonderfully. This is honestly one of my favorite soundtracks in the series. And like many of the games on the PlayStation, at least in English, the game is full of beautifully cheesy voice acting. So many classic lines, which is why I will always recommend the original version of the game every time. The PSP version was redubbed, and while it might technically be better, I missed the cheese immediately. So definitely, if you can, play the original PS1 version to experience the magic of the voice acting.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
It was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh. I was called here by humans who wish to pay me tribute.
Alucard, what is your business here?
I've come to put an end to this.
Still befriending mortals. I'll not ask you to return to our side, but I demand you cease your attack.
I will not.
Young master, I cannot aid one who opposes the master.
You won't go unrewarded.
Really? In that case, just tell me what you need.
This castle is a creature of chaos. It may take many incarnations.
And that was Castlevania Symphony of the Night. One of my absolute favorite games, and one of the best in the Castlevania series. The game definitely deserves all of the praise it's gotten over the years, and it's truly an amazing experience. It might go without saying, but I definitely recommend checking out Symphony of the Night. The story's fun, the gameplay and the music are great, and of course, that wonderful, cheesy voice acting. It's all just so much fun. If you haven't played Symphony of the Night, just do it. When I jump back into the Castlevania series, I'm going to work on covering the rest of the 2D Metroidvania games before I circle back around to take care of the spin-offs and then move on to the 3D games. So next up, It's Castlevania Circle of the Moon for the Game Boy Advance. Thank you all so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And if you want to see more of me, you can catch me streaming all kinds of games over on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/CaseyTheGamer91. And I also have a Patreon where you can get perks like early video access and some other cool stuff. And that is patreon.com/CaseyTheGamer91. You can find both of those links and all of my other links in the description below. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope to catch you next time. Peace out.